Welcome, everybody, to my talk, Touring Assisi. This is the third talk on Assisi. We're going to subterranean areas of Assisi in this talk, subterranean marvels Roman to the Renaissance. And I'd just like to briefly introduce myself. I think most of you know me. Many of you have toured with me. For those who don't, my name is Anne Robichaud. Born in New England, grew up in Wisconsin, University of Santa Clara, and then Cal Berkeley, and ended up in Italy thanks to a junior year abroad program while at the University of Santa Clara. I never intended to marry an Italian. His name is Pino Alagna, and we've lived in the Assisi countryside since 1975, working the land for many years while I also ran a small English school, which grew eventually, and Pino started working as a builder. I talked about our life on the land in one of my virtual experiences, and I'd like to mention that they are all on the virtual experiences page of my website. I think this is number 29, if I'm not mistaken. And it might be something you'd like to do some evening on a sleepless night. And today we're going to be talking about the mostly underground wonders of Assisi. I'd like to thank those who've made donations towards this work, which is continuing. And I would like to thank in advance those who will be making very appreciated donations to sustain this work. I'll be talking for about an hour and then happy to take your questions at the end. There is a section on the website where you can write your comments in the chat, and Rick will read those questions and comments first before we take other people's questions. Thank you for sharing this talk. It will be on my website as of Monday for anybody who missed it. And I'd also like to recommend that the 4 or 5 blog notes I've written this week about the sites we're seeing today will enhance your understanding of everything we're talking about. So you want to check the blog as well. So we're starting our tour with Assisi. As of about 1826, Assisi's cultural association, the Accademia Properziana del Subasio, decided to gather together the ancient inscriptions and Roman remnants of the territory. Many of the results of private donations, other ones found during moments of excavation. And this cultural association of Assisi, as I mentioned, the Accademia Properziana del Subasio, that is referring to Mount Subasio, referring to Properzio, the Latin poet of the 1st century AD, that for the Assisiani he was born in Assisi, but for the Spellani, he was born in Spello. They were a cultural association dedicated to the cultural input of their town. And the first nucleus of the findings of the Accademia Properziana del Subasio was kept on the pronow area, that is the column area, of the Minerva Temple of Assisi, built in the 1st century BC, transformed into a Baroque church eventually. The most recent structure is 16th century. And the Roman remnants were kept here really on the porch, if you will, of this temple. In 1899, the Accademia created a virtual Museo Civico, or civic museum, utilizing the vacant ambiances in a Franciscan monastery not far from this main piazza of Assisi, called the Convento, which is the residence of the friars in Italian, the Convento di Sant'Antonio. But in 1926, the city of Assisi decided to turn the Convento of Sant'Antonio into the elementary school. That year, a substantial amount of money was raised in memory of the 700th, or commemoration of the 700th anniversary of the death of Francis of Assisi in 1226. And with this huge amount of money raised, the intention was to invest in a museum to conserve the medieval, Roman, and also Renaissance artifacts of Assisi and masterpieces. The medieval and Renaissance would be kept in the Pinacoteca or Civic Picture Gallery, whereas the Roman and pre-Roman treasures were displayed in the crypt of an adjacent church. Now, before we move to the place where they're now housing the Roman remnants, let us look for a moment at the interior of the temple to Minerva. Transformed into a Baroque interior, 16th, 17th century, at the will of that despised Pope, in many ways despised, by the Perugini. For those of you who heard my Perugia lecture, he's Paul III, the Farnese Pope, who levied the heavy salt tax on the people of the Papal States in the mid-16th century, causing the Salt Wars, if you will. He has this church built in the mid-16th century. The Minerva Temple fell into ruin, really, the Roman temple, for some 100 years after it was built. It was built in about 30 BC. For many reasons, attacks by the barbarians, those fellows with beards, beard is barba in Italian, the Goths from northern Italy, the Lombards later, 5th to 8th century from the area of present-day Germany, and so forth. And it's thought that in about the 5th, 6th century, the Benedictines will take over the space of the Minerva Temple and create a small church called San Donato. The Church of San Donato is given over to the city of Assisi in the 13th century. At that time, the Benedictines give the edifice over to the city of Assisi, but they keep some of the rooms upstairs in which the Benedictines had used for their sleeping quarters and so forth. And so this church is later than 16th, 17th century. And it now is a Franciscan church. That Minerva Temple, of course, is the heart of the city of Assisi. It's in the main square Piazza del Comune. It backdrops the wonderful Calendi Maggio festival in May. And during the 12th and 13th century, it was used by the magistrates as a prison. As depicted in this fresco, attributed to Giotto, but probably not Giotto, let's say the school of Giotto, very end of the 13th century, early 14th century, which is part of the cycle of the Franciscan, the Francis story depicted on the walls of the Upper Basilica of Assisi. In this image, Francis, still a young nobleman. He's in blue, the color of nobility. He's wearing a halo. He will be a saint, but he's not yet in the garb of the little poor man. And he's walking across a cloak laid down for him by the simpleton of Assisi. Behind him is the Minerva Temple. No door, bars on the window, indicating that at that time it was used as a prison. They turned it into a little church for the fresco cycle because you couldn't put a pagan temple into the glorious Basilica of San Francesco. So this is a little bit of artistic modification. Now, as mentioned, the Roman collection will move to the Crypt of San Nicolo, which is right on the Piazza del Comune. And this here is the entrance to the crypt. We have two views of it. If you go up these steps, you see a fresco here of the early 14th century. This was done by Palmerino di Guido of Assisi, who was a follower of Simone Martini. And as of 1926, however, let's go back to the Church of San Nicolo, it was in need of restoration. It was in a dismal state. And the fascist government of Assisi, 1924 to 1925, decides basically to eliminate it. And nothing really is left of it. There's a little niche now. The fresco had been removed, but then was returned here in the mid-1920s. This little pulpit here is a remake, if you will. The base of it is original. It's 14th century. So this is called San Nicolo di Piazza. San Nicolo was the patron saint of the merchants of Assisi. One of them was Francis of Assisi's father, Pietro Bernardone. So we're going to go down the steps now. Around the corner, you can see the pulpit. We've come down the steps, and we are going to enter into the Foro Romano, the Assisi underground, it's also called, because we're under the pre-existing Church of San Nicolo. And in fact, look at this stunning setting for the Roman artifacts of Assisi, the Museo Civico and Foro Romano. This is the crypt of the 11th century of the Church of San Nicolo. And you can see some very hefty columns there, Roman columns used to sustain, if you will, the vaults of the crypt. These are funerary markers here, and here we have an image of what the Minerva Temple looked like. I'm going to zero in on that in just a moment. But again, we're under the former Chiesa di San Nicolo di Piazza, and these columns are columns of the crypt. Hefty columns, Roman certainly. I was very lucky to have a marvelous tour of the Museo Foro Romano with Laura, dear friend of Julia's. She's been one of her best friends since they were in elementary, since they were in kindergarten together. And Laura says to me very modestly, laughing as she took me through, Anne, I'm not an archaeologist, you know that. And she may not be an archaeologist, but her knowledge of this museum is astounding. She works in this museum as in, well, in other museums in Assisi. I believe her degree is in lettere moderne or literature. And she's pointing out to me this recreation of the temple to Minerva. And we're in this area here, which would have been the area of the forum in front of the Minerva Temple. In front of the Minerva Temple was also a tetrastilio, which is a small temple or shrine with 4 columns. We're going to see the base of it shortly as we tour this museum. Might have been dedicated to the gods, the twin gods, Castor and Pollux. We don't know who the Minerva Temple was dedicated to. For some archaeologists, it was dedicated to the goddess Minerva. For other archaeologists, it was dedicated to Hercules. For other archaeologists, to the twins, Castor and Pollux. So the destination of this temple, the honorific intention is unknown. Archaeologists have not agreed on this. Now, below the temple here image, we have a funerary marker, if you will. We call this a tomb marker. It would be stele sepolcrale in Italian. And this was an image here of the deceased inside a niche. And such an image is called a nescos, as Laura explained to me. And this image is from the 1st century AD. Laura also showed me an Ornabisoma. She explained to me that an Ornabisoma was for the funerary ashes of 2 personages, in this case, probably husband and wife. This is made out of limestone of the 2nd century BC, and it demonstrates the facade of this urn here. We've got it enlarged here on the right, demonstrate the Etruscan influence in Roman sculptural works as the deceased reclines on a cline, the bed that was used for lounging around the table. This is a typical image on an Etruscan tomb, if you will. So we're seeing here the Etruscan influence on the Roman remnants and sculptures of Assisi. Probably the image is the anticipation of the banquet they will share together in the next life in eternity. The urn probably was to hold the ashes of both the husband and the wife. Laura pointed out to me that the wife is seated. She's not in a reclining position, thus indicating an inferior position for the woman. Also in this urn here, she is seated. Her husband is reclining. This is another funerary urn. He's holding a wreath in one hand and a drinking cup in the other. And this was found near Piazza del Vescovado and the Church of St. Mary Major, where we're going to see some extraordinary Roman frescoes in a Roman villa, which was on that site. Below this image, we have a sarcofago strigliato. Strigliato means with these curved swoops representing the strigilli. They are metal instruments which the gladiators and athletes used to wipe the oil off their body. So hence called strigliato, like a strigilli. And these are two strigilli of the 1st century AD, not in that museum, but just to show you what strigillato means, looking like a strigillo in its design. In my talk on Gubbio, if any of you remembered, we saw a sarcophagus in the Museum of Gubbio, which is also strigillato. Very interesting was the urn cover of the 1st century BC. It was topped by a phallic signalacum, and the signalacum signals that tomb, meaning indicating who was there. One knows by the signalacum above it. This signalacum is phallic, but it's what is called apotropaic. That is, it wards off the evil eye, wards off evil spirits. And also sculpted is the head of Gorgone, a Greek mythical monster whose hair is generally writhing serpents. This is a funerary urn of the 1st century BC. And then from that area of the urns and so forth, we walked down this passageway. We're now walking under the main piazza of Assisi. All along on both sides are stele sepolcrali of the 2nd BC to the 2nd century AD, meaning tomb markers. Lauda pointed out various to me, but I'm going to mention a couple. The one on the left is 1st century BC. The inscription tells us buried here was Mimizia. She was a seamstress. On the right, this is the 1st century AD. This was the funerary marker of the tomb of a liberato. That is a former slave, probably Greek. They were often enslaved by the Romans, who was freed. So this is the tomb of a freed slave, a liberato. Very sobering was the 2nd century AD tomb, the tomb marker of a loyal young Roman soldier who had given up his life to fight for the empire. And on his tomb were his weapons. Perhaps this was his helmet. Perhaps these are his footprints. And this is of the 2nd century AD, this tomb marker. And this was found near the Mausoleum, which is a Roman tomb on the road down to San Damiano. If you heard my talk outside the walls of Assisi, or you might see it now on the virtual experiences page, this was also in it because it is near the Church of San Damiano, which we talked about in that presentation. So as we walk past these stele sepolcrali, or these tomb markers, we're heading towards the tribunale, tribunal as expressed in English or translated in English. And it was placed along the axis of the temple, as you can see here. It was a tribunal or a speaking platform for public speakers with holes on the surface for the joints, pins for the bolts of their benches on which they sat, the wrought iron benches. Now, I want to show you this in a reproduction of the Minerva Temple. The pronao up here, this row of the 6 Corinthian capitals. Inside now it's a church, so we're talking about when it was a temple. The tribunale was below it, and on this platform there were holes. There are holes in this wall behind it, because into those holes were the bolts that held the wrought iron benches and chairs in which they sat. Near it was the tetrastylio, and we're going to see the base of this small 4-column temple as well. But here we're at the tribunale, and Lauda is pointing out to me the holes for the bolts to hold the benches down. The benches were on here. The bolted into the wall were the pins to hold the benches, and this is the floor. And there was a young boy there from Northern Italy with his parents, very interested in everything Laura was telling me, and also very interested in the excellent video explanations. And you can see here a recreation of the speaker on the Tribunale as the crowd listens. They have excellent, excellent visual explanations now in this museum. And excellent explanations in English. So get ready when you come to Assisi. This is the base of the Tetrastilo nearby. Of the 1st century AD, it was in travertine. It would have been topped with 4 columns. And the inscription Laura is showing me is saying that this was built by 2 liberati, I believe husband and wife, freed Greek slaves. And it's also inscribed here that they donated an extensive amount of money to the civic authorities of the city of Assisium, as it was called, as well as the plebes, the common people. Near the Tetrastilo, there is a wall which is about 26 meters long. And this was the area of the botteghe, the shops where street food was sold. And the amphorae found indicate that probably among the things sold here were wines and garum. Oh, that favorite Roman dish, which is a fermented fish sauce, if you can imagine. You want to note the squared off holes in this wall, probably for oak beams, because there would have been a second floor. Probably at the top, there would have been platforms where the merchants could store their goods. Near the exit are 2 marble statues, very impressive marble statues. They're both found near the Roman Temple, and they're both of about the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD. The first figure is just called the togato, the togaed one. And he's probably representing an important local civic personage. How do we know that? The style of the toga and the place where it was found, right near the Roman Temple. The second one was probably a female figure, also found near the Roman Temple, representing a seated woman, probably a goddess. Who knows if it was Minerva? We notice the very thin tunic. Her torso is missing, thus making it impossible to seek an identity of this personage. It was probably intended for a temple because the back of it was not sculpted. So it was probably going to be seated and in perhaps a throne. So was the temple dedicated to Minerva? Was the temple dedicated to the twin gods Castor and Pollux? Was the temple dedicated to Hercules? We don't know. There is a tablet in the temple with an inscription with a dedication to Hercules, and this is from the 2nd century AD. So the Roman treasures of Assisi don't end with the Museo del Foro Romano. Laura took me another day to see 2 extraordinary sites, 2 domos, which means urban dwellings, Roman, of the 1st century AD. Both were found in about 2001, I believe. Well, the second one, which was found under the tribunal or the courthouse today, was found in 2001. The other domus, which was found under the crypt or under the altar of Santa Maria Maggiore, was first found in the mid-19th century, and then work stopped for lack of financing. Then it was picked up again in the 20th century. So let's enter first into Santa Maria Maggiore. And we're going to head right up to the altar. The altar is built over probably a Lombard tomb. That cross is typical of Longobard architecture, the Germanic peoples from northern Italy who had a dukedom in the Umbria area from the 5th to 8th century AD. So we headed up to the altar. It's very important when you go into these places to know somebody who has the keys. Laura had the keys. Because she works for these museums. We went down the steps to the left of the altar. Laura opened the door. She went before me. She was beaming. I could see behind her Roman ruins. Went down into the crypt. This is the crypt, probably of about the 11th century of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, flanked by columns. We went past those columns, and then Laura showed me the opus sectile floor of the Domus di Properzio. We call it the House of Properzio, although there's no evidence that the poet Properzio lived in this house. Of the 1st century AD. Restoration is still going on. It is open to the public a couple Saturdays a month. It used to be open. If you come to Assisi and wish to see it, I can organize a visit there for you through the Roman Forum Museum. She showed me this extraordinary opus sectile floor, which means a floor made of pieces of marble unified together, very precious marbles from different countries, including Greece and even Africa. And she said, Anna, look at this. This is something amazing that the restorers found very recently. One of the tiles is movable. She lifted it out, flipped it over. On the back, it's hard to see in this photo, there was sculpted an incision of a leaf. The archaeologists do not know the significance of it. We went into an adjacent room, and Laura showed me the floor and explained to me this is called opus scutulatum. Opus scutulatum is the making of a mosaic floor with tiles of a dark color as the background and all different pieces of marble of many, many different colors. And this was the floor of the acus, and the acus is roughly the living area of the home. The walls were covered with fresco. And let me see if I could show you a detail. I want to show you a detail of this fresco. The fresco had images of sea creatures. This is a starfish. This is a crab. And then just the other side of the acus is the cryptoportico with the pinaces. A cryptoportico is a covered portico. Pinaces are small pictures. This is Apollo in a chariot. And these are on different sections, these two different sections of the wall of the cryptoportico. And then very beautiful next to the cryptoportico, absolutely astounding really, is the Viridarium. Oh. The Viridarium is a garden with flowering plants for pleasure. So these Romans, imagine this, depicting in their home in fresco, right next to the place maybe where they ate, a beautiful flowering garden, different types of vegetation, about 96 different birds. Archaeologists have not been able to identify their breeds of these birds for the most part because so much has been lost of the paintwork over the centuries. Near the Viridarium, Laura pointed out to me on the wall a little bit of graffiti, but this is graffiti of the 4th century AD. And it says in Latin, I have been to the home of the muse being the poet, Properzio. And this made archaeologists wonder, was this the house of Properzio? But they don't think so because the dates do not fit with the dates of his life and his death. I believe he died mid-1st century AD. She also pointed out in the Viridarium right here on the bottom, a grasshopper. In another place along the border, there's a little bit of a lizard. So after we left the Domus di Properzio, which is in the crypt, under the crypt of, or near the crypt of the Santa Maria Maggiore Church, which is 12th century AD, 11th, 12th. And you may remember, it was right near the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore that Francis of Assisi stripped himself naked, renouncing his father's earthly inheritance. and thus taking on a life of poverty. So if you come out of that church of Santa Maria Maggiore and go right and walk about 50 meters, you come to another extraordinary domus. This was discovered in 2001. And I believe it was discovered when they were doing restoration work on the foundations of the Assisi Tribunal or courthouse following the 1997 earthquake. And what did they find? But an extraordinary villa of 250 square meters and I believe 13 rooms. This is a beautiful mosaic floor of a cubicola, and we're up at the top. We're taking this photo down. We're way up at the top of the platform because restoration is going on now, so there was no access to us to go down. And Lauda pointed down at this flower here, and I've enlarged it. And she said, Anna, look at that. That is like a welcome carpet into the bedroom because this is a cubiculum. This is one of the bedrooms. This is a palace of 13 rooms. On one of the walls, beautiful fresco of the couple who probably lived there, reclining. She's looking at him with great love. Beautiful image is her earring. Her body is in a curved position. You can see a lot of detail in the border of her dress. A great development of perspective and three-dimensional volume in this. And archaeologists consider it the work of a very, very fine artist, 1st century AD. Part of this domus of Lalarium is also the peristyle, peristilio, which would be a covered portico. And this covered portico was found when they were, I want to show you this, I'm going to move this down a bit, when they were doing restoration of this palazzo in 2001, and they were going to put in an elevator here. And they were digging down, they're going to put in this elevator, and they found the Roman columns. And that's when restoration work started on this Domus di Lalarium. And let's look at that word again, of the 1st century AD. Lalarium. Lalario was the area of the house where sacred images were kept, a divinity. It could be a niche, it could be a room. The Larario. And when they restored this, they found small terracotta votive objects, which are now in the Museum of Perugia. And it seemed that those might have been the Lalari of the houses, the deities protecting the owners of the home. Even the parking lot of Assisi hides Roman treasures. And this is the parking lot in the upper part of town, Piazza Matteotti. And I just want to show you, it is built over the pre-existing Roman circus. So here is the Circo of the 1st century AD. The parking lot is here now. There's a little neighborhood here with houses built in a circular form. That's where the Roman Amphitheater was of the 1st century AD. Probably held 17,000 people, the Roman Amphitheater of Assisi. It could be flooded for naval battles, for gladiatorial competitions as well. And near the circus was also probably the theater. We're going to see some of the stones of the theater set into a private home of Assisi. This is an incision done centuries later. This is an image of medieval Assisi. And I want to mention again, the parking lot area is up here where the circus would have been. And there is the theater, the amphitheater, the Basilica of San Francesco. So this is the upper eastern end of the town. Now, walking through the Via Tecta, which means covered walkway, you can go to the parking lot. And you enter the Via Tecta really in the center of Assisi. And I wonder if the people walking through there can imagine the excitement that Romans must have felt in the 1st century AD, walking through there, headed towards the amphitheater probably, or the circus to see chariot races, or the amphitheater to see gladiatorial battles. And you walk through the Via Tecta, and you come up near some crumbling Roman wall, go up the elevator, and you're at the parking lot. Pick up your car and head out. Okay, the Via Tecta. So that is covered, a covered road, covered walkway. Across the street from the parking lot is the neighborhood of the Amphitheater, medieval homes built, if you will, into the contours of the Roman amphitheater. I talked to a local historian, Enrico Sciamana. Well, what happened to the amphitheater? Well, good question. You know, over the years, barbarians will invade, there'll be devastation. There was a tremendous earthquake also in 1000 AD. For various reasons, no really evidence of remaining structures of the amphitheater of any significance are there for us to see. The amphitheaters were probably made, this was probably made of local travertine. Amphitheaters often became quarries. There's the famous expression in Rome, che non fecero I barbari, fecero I barberini. What the barbarians didn't do in Rome, the Barberini did, because the Barberini popes used, former amphitheaters like the Colosseum as quarries. There's great, excellent, perfectly wonderful cut off blocks of travertine taken away and reused. So we have very little remaining of the amphitheater, but it's wonderful to walk this neighborhood and walk along these curvy roads. This is the left side of the amphitheater, the right side, and you're getting the sense that you are in what was the Roman amphitheater. Up there is not the major fortress, but the smaller one called La Roccicciola. Then if you walk this way, you come to the lavatoio comunale, where women wash their clothes for many years. I've asked local people, when was this built? There's been a lavatoio there, or a communal wash area, for centuries. People weren't sure of the dates of this one. I myself remember in the late 70s when we moved here, women washing here. They'd wash their heavy things like quilts, blankets, whatever, bedspreads. They had washing machines, but they'd gather here to wash the more cumbersome objects, which maybe didn't fit in their washing machines. This is a photo by a local Assisian, Angelo Maccabei. Here he is when he's a small boy at the lavatoio comunale with his mother and two other women as they're washing. The stones will slant down so that they can, scrub well their wash. Next to the lavatoio is a fountain. It's called Fonte Perlichi. It's a fountain of the 13th century. This inscription here is in Gothic script, and it tells us who made it, how it was financed. These are coats of arms of Assisi families, and this is the coat of arms. This is the cross here of the city of Assisi. Perlichi. Fonte Perlichi, there's the symbols again. Around the wall here, there's a bear. That could be a bear. That could be a beaver. We don't know what. This is a sculpture of the 13th century. And it is thought that it was put up there at that time because also in the amphitheater area, there were combats with bears. The Longobards had combats as well with bears. And this dates from the 13th century. Some archaeologists feel that it might represent a beaver. I don't quite see the similarity with a beaver, but a beaver is an aquatic animal. Porta Perlichi and Fonte Perlichi. We have a city gate not far from here called Porta Perlichi. The fountain is called Fonte Perlichi. On the other side of the amphitheater, I was walking years ago. I didn't take this photo years ago, but I remember looking in that gate and being quite astounded at what I was seeing. It looked like ancient wall. And a gentleman came out of the gate, and I asked him about it, and it turned out to be Dr. Torretti, who lived there, and he invited me in to see it. And I went in again recently and was shown around by a family friend. These are part of the walls of the Roman amphitheater, incorporated in to their restoration project, which was done quite recently. It was done between 94, and 1997. And it says that the house of Costanza and Augusto Torretti restored this in those years. And this evidences precious remnants, archaeological remnants, which are Roman and medieval from the 1st century AD to the 13th century. Now, I was in their house this week, an absolutely lovely house. This is a medieval arch here. This is Roman wall, 1st century AD. Roman wall, 1st century AD. This is their kitchen. The ceiling, medieval. And from the dining room, one looks out into the courtyard. This is Roman wall of the amphitheater, 1st century AD, and this is Roman wall in their living room. And this is looking out again to the courtyard, Roman 1st century AD. And also in their home, in the living room to the right, they have all pieces of ceramics which were found during the restoration, all labeled. This is 13th to 14th century. I believe this is older, 12th to 13th century. There's 4 sections like this of exquisitely beautiful pieces of ceramics, ceramica, of the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. That is 12th century to 16th, probably. This is a medieval arch in their garden. And this is Luigi, who showed me around. He's the caregiver now of Dr. Torretti, who's now bedridden. He's not well. And he was delighted to show me everything and showed it to me with great pride. The other side of the amphitheater, there's an entrance now into the spa. This is a 5-star luxury hotel called the Noon. And the rooms are built into a pre-existing edifice, a 13th century convent to St. Catherine. And the spa area is set into the area of the Roman amphitheater, as you can see here. And this is their website, noonassisi.com. Now, when we're talking about Assisi, we certainly have to talk about pre-Roman times, because the Romans, yes, settled in Assisi, but before the Romans settled in Assisi, the Umbri people were here. And the Umbri people settled in this area probably in the 6th century BC. And these objects, which are votive objects, that is religious wish objects, objects kept so that the gods will be with you and so forth, were actually in our public library in the 1970s. I remember being able to see them. And I don't know where they are. I talked with an archaeologist, Enrico Shaman, as mentioned, and I asked him, are they now in the Museum of Perugia? And he said he didn't think so. He thinks they're probably kept in City Hall. But at one time, you could ask the librarian, and she would take them out of a shoebox. This is in the 1970s, to show you these artifacts of the 6th century BC of the Italic people who lived here before the Romans. As of the 3rd century BC, the area is dominated by the Romans. Obviously, the Roman temple to Minerva is sign of the power of the Roman people here. And here again, a depiction of the Roman temple to Minerva, a nice one here, because this would have been the tribunal where the seats were. And this was the tetrastilio, or the base of the temple, which would have 4 columns. But Roman signs are all over Assisi. This is Via San Paolo, right off the main square. You have to keep your eyes open. If you walk, this is a Roman retaining wall of the 1st century AD, because the city of Assisium was terraced. So this was used to hold back the hill, if you will. Near the parking lot of Piazza Matteotti, there's a Roman column here in front of a house. There's St. Francis up there looking down on it. And this was probably a column of a portico that maybe might have bordered the Roman amphitheater. Nearby is a mausoleum called by the locals the Torrione, or the Big Tower. It's a family tomb of the 1st century AD, probably the tomb of, I believe the family was Petronius, who paid for a lot of the work on the Roman amphitheater, and their tomb was very close to the Roman amphitheater. Walking down the street towards the Cathedral of San Rafino on your right, You can see Roman wall jutting out. This was the olive mill where we used to take our olives to be pressed into oil in the 1970s. It's the private home of the Rinaldi family. And it's thought that maybe this stonework is that of the Roman theater of the 1st century AD. This is you can see a bit of the fortress, Rocca Maggiore, mid-14th century. This is the bell tower of the Cathedral of San Rafino. If you walk around the back of this house, you can see these arches here. Some archaeologists feel they're arches of the Roman theater of the 1st century AD. I was in the Rinaldi house this week, and 3 rooms are vaulted. Roman vaults, 1st century AD. 3 rooms look like this. This is what you have over your bed when you go to sleep, a Roman vault. The Chiesa Nuova, new church, 17th century. On the side of it, there is a Roman inscription related to the theater of Assisi, 1st century AD, stuck into the wall of a church. So really in Assisi, it's important to keep your eyes open, and you're going to see the little treasures. On the right, as you leave the Basilica of St. Clare and walk down Via Sant'Agnese, there's Roman wall. This is part of that Roman wall. This is a column. There was probably an arch over the road. And I want to mention this house here. This is a house, obviously not Roman, obviously not medieval, work here. Finally, the final work was done in the 17th century. But Pino restored this house. And his crew restored it, I'm thinking, about 10 years ago. And when they went to the lower level, they found the vaulted Roman cisterns of the 1st century AD. We took a walk today in Assisi, and we stopped at another house. This is a medieval arch, but inside there is a Roman arch of the 1st century AD. When these Neapolitans bought this house some years ago, they said to Pino, "We want to get an extra bedroom. Can we enlarge?" And Pino said, "No, you're tied to the architectural laws here. You can't. You can go down." And they said, "Would you go down?" And Pino said, "Oh, I'd go down because you're in the area of the Roman Amphitheater." And who knows? And they went down, and now the bedroom downstairs has a huge niche, which was one of the arches of the Roman Amphitheater. Let's see. If you eat at the pizzeria called Menestrello, look at the wall. That's Roman 1st century AD, part of the Roman retaining wall. Walk down the street towards the main square from St. Clare. You pass the boutique of Lisa. Her daughter is called Margherita, and she'll take you in to see all the Roman wall in their shop. This is Roman wall, 1st century AD. She took me down the stairs, Roman wall on the left, Roman wall at the bottom. This is local limestone blocks, and limestone blocks of the Roman period, 1st century AD. We call this the imperial period. Flank the coats and the dresses. Shoes are displayed on a Roman slab. A surprise little mannequin has her hand on part of the Roman wall. In many an Assisi church, the altar tables are placed on Roman columns. These are 2 side chapels in the Santa Maria Maggiore church. The columns could be from the house of Properzio, the Domus Properzio, which was found below. Now, the Cathedral of San Rafino, the door to the right, if you look up at the wall, you'll see a relief. This is, I believe, at least 1st century BC, if not 2nd century BC. A man in a tunic leads his horse, and this plaque was set into this wall some centuries ago. It had once been on the facade of the Roman temple to the goddess Minerva. Leading up to the Cathedral of San Rafino, when they did restoration of the piazza following the earthquake of 1997, they found Roman road of the maybe 1st century AD. It could have been 1st century BC. This Roman road probably led up to this church, which at that time would have been a temple, the temple probably dedicated to the Bona Mater, or the Good Mother, the goddess of fecundity and fertility. And it probably led from this massive Roman arch, which you can't see if you visit Assisi because it's in a private home. But it was the Roman exit on the south end of the town. So this is the Roman, the site of the Roman temple, the Cathedral of San Rafino, 12th century. Inside, it was a beautiful Romanesque church. The Romanesque is all gone now. It was restored in the 16th century. The style will become neoclassical, then Baroque. It is most famous as the place where you can go to see the baptismal font in which Clare and Francis were baptized. And this family was there to see that baptismal font the day I went in to take some pictures of San Rafino. And for this talk, I particularly wanted to take a picture of the Roman cistern. And as you enter the door, the farthest door to the left, and come in the door from the outside, look left, you see a massive arch here. And that was the Roman cistern of the 2nd century BC, perfectly intact. They built the bell tower of the Cathedral of San Rafino over the Roman cistern. Rufinus was the first Christian bishop of Assisi, martyred in the 3rd century AD, and he is the patron saint of Assisi. We remember that Francis is the patron saint of all of Italy, along with Catherine of Siena. So Roman cistern, 2nd century BC, and in the Museum of San Rafino, you can see a Roman well. I believe it's 35 meters deep. It's of the 2nd century AD. Backing it, you can see the crypt of the 11th century church. Now, I had said that on this site was the temple probably to the goddess Bona Mater, and she was the goddess of fecundity and fertility. And interestingly, she is very tied still to this church in a way, because over the main door, this is the main door here, we have this image. We have God the Father blessing. Rufinus is on his left. The Virgin nursing the Christ child is on the right. And that is the Madonna del Latte. And recently I was in the museum of the Church of San Rafino, the crypt, and I wanted to see if I could find the quote exactly. I asked young Federica, who works in there, I said to Federica, I said, you know, this Madonna del Latte, the mother of milk, and she represents the church who nurses the Christian. She's on the facade of the Cathedral of San Rafino. And okay, she was done in the 12th century, but don't you think she's somehow related to the fact that there was a temple here to the goddess of fecundity and fertility? And she said this. She said, certamente, that image of the Madonna del Latte is a Christianizing of an ancient pagan cult to the goddess of fecundity and fertility. So how everything is linked. Now, in the church below the present level is the crypt of the 11th and 12th century church. And the crypt is topped with columns. There are columns which hold up the crypt, if you will. The columns are topped with capitals. And if the capitals are Ionic, they're of the 2nd to 1st century BC. And if they're Doric, 4th to 5th century AD. Now let's have a look. There you go. There you have some Ionic capitals. And this is the crypt. Here we have the sarcophagus. The sarcophagus was a Roman sarcophagus of the 3rd century AD, and the remains of the body of San Rafino were transferred here into the sarcophagus in the 8th century AD. Let's see some details of the sarcophagus. Beautiful sculpted marble sarcophagus. This is the front side. On the back side, in the 15th century, they did a painting of the deceased San Rafino. You can see his hand here. This is the deceased bishop. The painting has worn away. It was painted in the 15th century. And here you can see some of the columns of the crypt, an exquisitely beautiful place. We have these Doric capitals here and Corinthian capitals here, or excuse me, Ionic here, Doric here. And then up near where the well is, which I showed you, or just let's say just adjacent really to that crypt, you can see columns, the date. These are medieval columns. They're from the 8th to probably 12th century AD. In the Museum of the Crypt of San Rafino, there are some exquisite art pieces, including this triptych here, which is a tripartite altar piece. And this was done by Niccolò Alunno, called the Liberatore. And this was done in the 15th century. Actually in about 1462. On the predella, or the base, we have scenes of the tortures to which Rufinus was subjected before he was martyred. A Roman consul ordered him thrown into a fire. They're throwing him into the fire, but he was able to escape. They later drowned him in the Chiascia River below Assisi, and these are locals taking out his body after the first bishop of Assisi, Rufinus, has been drowned. These are a couple details. Let's go back and look at the triptych, because I want to show you the details of the saints to the right, saints to the left of the Virgin enthroned. On the right, Rufinus, the bishop, and saintly deacon is with him. On the left is one of the writers of the Gospels. An art historian, Elvio Lunghi, believes it is, St. John. And this is another holy deacon, if you will, unidentified personage. And above the two, we create the scene of the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel, the Blessed Virgin. This is wood gilded, late 15th century, absolutely exquisite piece. And these are some details. And up at the tip is the angel blessing. Important along the predella too, and I want to go back to the painting. Along the predella, we have an important scene right here. Let me show it to you. This is the city of Assisi as it looked in the 15th century, seen from St. Mary the Angels. And we're seeing the Basilica of St. Francis before the alteration on it, ordered by Sixtus IV, Franciscan Pope, in the mid-15th century. We can clearly see the fortress, the Rocca Maggiore, 14th century, and we can clearly see the bell tower of the Cathedral of San Rafino, the bell tower of the Basilica of St. Clare, and the smaller fortress called the Rocca Minore. Also in the Museo della Crypt of San Rafino, which is also called the Diocesan Museum, the Blessed Virgin reigns in more than one painting. In the museum, you'll see a lovely Virgin done by a follower probably of Duccio, the great Sienese painter, 14th century. An exquisite painting of a Madonna and Child. Very delicate is the Virgin, very delicate is her robe. This is a transparent garment the Christ child is wearing. This is a 15th century Madonna, as is this one. This is framed by two columns. This is a wooden panel piece, again, 15th century. And before you leave, you'll want to see the painting, which was returned to the cathedral. It was stolen from a private collection of an Assisi home. It is by a Venetian master. It is a 14th century painting called Dormitio Verginei, which means the Virgin asleep, the sleep of death, if you will. She's surrounded by the apostles who are mourning her and praying. Two are kneeling in front of her. And this returned to the museum. I believe it returned in 2015. And it was thanks to the work, I have to read the name of this. I can say the abbreviation of the NCTPA, which is the Nucleo Carabinieri Tutela Patrimonio Artistico, the nucleus of the Carabinieri Police guarding the artistic patrimony of Italy. Now, this note has mentioned simply a few of the masterpieces in Assisi's Museo Diocesano and the Crypt of San Rafino, a few of the masterpieces of underground Assisi, but I'd like to assure you that underground Assisi is certainly not to be underestimated. Hope to be with you soon to tour some of the underground treasures of our town. Mille grazie. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing in these explorations of Assisi. And it's been my pleasure. Very important to say thanks to those who donated and those who will donate. And I hope my work can continue.